You already know what a pirate ship looks like. Everybody does. What nobody ever tells you is what it smelled like. Because that is the first thing you would notice. Before the sails, before the flag, before any of it. On a still day, you could smell a ship of this period before you could see it. At the very bottom of the hull, there's a space called the bilge, where every drop of water that leaks in eventually collects, along with the rot and the rats that drowned in it and everything that is drained down through the ship since the day it was launched. It is almost never cleaned because it almost cannot be reached. Above that sit 60 to 150 men who have not washed in weeks because there is no fresh water to spare for washing. So let us put you on board, not as a passenger, as one of the crew. Here is what your life actually looks like. Although first, you did not grow up wanting this. Almost every pirate was a sailor first. You worked a merchant ship for wages that could simply be withheld from you when you got back. Or you were taken by a press gang, seized off the street or out of a tavern and put on a naval ship, whether you agreed or not, for as long as they wanted you. And then one day the ship you're on gets stopped by another ship, and the men who come aboard ask whether anybody would like to join them. A surprising number of hands go up. Now, start with the ceiling. You cannot stand up. Below deck, the space between one floor and the one above it is often around 5 feet. So you spend your life stooped, in the dark, on a floor that is moving. There are no rooms. There is no door you can close and nowhere you can go to be by yourself. Not for a minute, not for a month. At night, you sling a hammock from the beams, and so does everybody else, packed so close that when the ship rolls, you all swing together and knock into each other. And you do not sleep through the night, because the ship is worked in watches, 4 hours on, 4 hours off, right round the clock. So you are woken in the dark every night, and somebody climbs into the hammock you have just left while it is still warm. Then you get up and work, not fighting, almost never fighting. You pump the bilge because the ship is always leaking, and if you stop pumping, it sinks. You mend rope, you patch sail, you scrub the deck, you climb the rigging in weather that would frighten you now. Barefoot, because bare feet grip wet wood better than boots do. You do this every day for months, and you are wet the entire time. That is the detail that gets left out of everything. Not damp, wet. Seawater comes over the deck and drains down through it. Rain comes in, the hull leaks from below constantly, which is why you're pumping. And there is no way to dry anything because there is nowhere dry and no heat. An open fire on a wooden ship is the thing everybody on board is most frightened of. So your clothes are wet, they stay wet, and then they begin to rot on you. And there is no shop. What you are standing in is what you have until you take something better off somebody else. Salt gets into all of it, and into any cut you have. Cuts do not heal quickly at sea. You are also not alone down there. Rats live in the hold and in the food stores, and there are always considerably more of them than there are of you. Now eat. Your staple is ship's biscuit, flour and water baked until it is more or less a stone. It keeps for years, which is the entire point of it, and it reliably contains weevils. Not occasionally, normally. You would knock it on the table first to make them fall out, or you would eat it in the dark so you did not have to look. That is a real habit, and that is the reason for it. With it, salt beef or salt pork out of a barrel, meat packed in brine, sometimes years old, sometimes hard enough that men carved things out of it. And the water is worse than the food. Fresh water in a wooden cask goes green in weeks. It grows things. You would drink beer or watered rum instead, and not because you were a drunk, because alcohol keeps, and water does not. Now the part everybody wonders about, and nobody films. There is no toilet. At the very front of the ship, there's a plank or a grating with a hole in it, hanging out over the open water. That is it. That is the entire facility, and it is called the head. You go up there in whatever weather's happening, with the ship pitching underneath you in full view of anyone on deck. In a storm, you do not go at all. You use a bucket. And it is at the front for a reason. That is the end the wind pushes from behind. Now, here's the part that would actually get to you. Nothing happens. Piracy is not one boarding after another. It is weeks of empty horizon. You are bored in a space the size of a bus with the same 80 faces, unable to leave, unable to be alone, with nothing to look at but water. Most of the time, that is the job. And then, one morning, there is a sail. You have a contract, by the way. This is the part that surprises people. Before you sailed, you signed something. The ship's articles. An actual written document, which everybody aboard signed or made their mark on. Several of them survive. They set out how everything taken would be divided. They set out the rules: no gambling for money, lights out at a set hour, keep your weapons clean. They set out the punishments in advance, in writing, so that they applied to everyone, including the men in charge. And they gave you a vote, not in a fight. In a fight, the captain's word is absolute and there is no arguing about it. But on everything else, where the ship goes, whether you attack, what happens to a prize? If the crew decide the captain is a coward or a fool or is cheating them, they vote him out. That happened repeatedly. It was not a rank he held. It was a job you let him keep. And there was a second man, the quartermaster, whom you also elected, whose entire purpose was to stand between the crew and the captain, to hand out the shares and to speak for you. And if you broke what you had signed, the punishments were written in there too. Most were small. The serious one was marooning. You are put ashore on a spit of sand with a bottle of water and a pistol, and the ship sails. The pistol is not for hunting. Now hold that thought, because there is a sail on the horizon. You do not want to fight either. That is what the flag is for. The black flag is not decoration. It is a message. And the message is, you know what we are, and you have one decision to make.
Stop now and nobody gets hurt. Run, and we cannot promise that.
Because a fight damages the ship you were trying to take. It kills men you might want to recruit. It gets your own friends killed over somebody else's cargo. So the flag goes up, and most of the time the other ship just stops. Then you take what is on it, and it is not what you are picturing. There is no chest of gold coins. That is very nearly an invention. What you actually want is cargo. Bolts of cloth, barrels of sugar, rum, tobacco, food, rope, sailcloth, tools, spare canvas. And above everything, the medicine chest. Medicine at sea was so valuable and so hard to come by that in 1718, Blackbeard blockaded an entire harbor and held hostages for days. And what he demanded as the ransom was a chest of drugs. You are not robbing a bank. You are robbing a warehouse. Then it gets shared out in front of everyone by the man you elected to do it. The captain takes a share and a half, or two. You take one. On the merchant ship you came from, the gap between the top and the bottom was not 1.5 to 1. It was not close to that. Now the thing that will actually happen to you. You will get hurt. And when you do, the man who treats you is very often the cook. Not because anyone thinks that is a good idea, but because a trained surgeon doesn't generally volunteer to sail with pirates, and the cook already owns the saw. But here is what the paper you signed says about that. There is a scale. A written scale, agreed before anybody was injured. So much for a right arm, slightly less for a left. So much for a leg, so much for an eye, so much for a finger. The numbers differ between crews because each crew wrote their own, but the principle does not differ. If the work takes part of your body, the group pays you for it, according to a schedule everybody agreed to in advance. That is disability compensation. On a criminal ship, roughly 200 years before any government managed the same idea. And you would need it. Because the thing most likely to kill you is not a battle and not a hanging. It is disease. Men packed together, no washing, no clean water, no idea what infection is. A fever moves through a ship and takes a third of the crew. Scurvy loosens your teeth and opens wounds that healed years ago. Then, if you live, you reach a port, and you spend all of it. Nearly every account describes the same thing. Men going through months of pay in days. Which looks insane until you remember that the average career here is measured in months and that everybody involved knows it. Now, let me stop being your narrator for a second, because there is a version of this that turns these men into heroes, and that version is a lie. They were violent. The threat is the entire mechanism. It's how a small ship takes a big one without a fight. They tortured people, and a number of these crews were directly involved in the slave trade, carrying and selling human beings, including some of the same crews who wrote those articles about fairness. The vote was real. It was also a vote for about 100 men, and it stopped hard at the edge of that deck. And it did not last. The whole Golden Age is a window of a few years. Most of these men were caught, or drowned, or died of fever, and the navies of the world hunted the rest down on purpose. So what was it actually like? It was dark and wet, and it stank. You were never alone and never rested. You ate stone with insects in it and drank water that had gone green. There was no privacy and no toilet and no way off. Most days, nothing happened at all, and the thing most likely to kill you was a fever. And you had a signed contract, a vote on where the ship went, the right to remove the man in charge of you, an equal share of everything taken, and a written promise that if the work took your arm, the men around you owed you for it. You would have been filthy, bored, frightened, and probably dead within 2 years. And for those 2 years, you would have been the only man in your family, going back as far as anybody could remember, who ever got asked what he thought.